Okay, today we have Denzil Monk. Thank you very much for talking to the Cornishman.
No
I
problem.
was just wondering if you could start off by introducing yourself.
My name's Denzil. I'm talking to you about a petition which I've started for BBC Kernow, which is a desire that a lot of people in Cornwall have to see Cornish language and culture properly represented in mainstream media. So whilst BBC Radio Cornwall and does have an audience, it's a segment of the Cornish audience, and it doesn't fully represent Cornish culture. And it has a very, very small amount of Cornish language, tiny bit of Cornish language, which is great. But the Cornish language community would like to see a lot more of that. And as the language is increasing, as people's use of the language and the learning of the language is increasing, it's really important to have more immersive media which people can use to help with learning and to make it more of a spoken language.
Right, okay. Could you just briefly talk us through BBC Kernow and sort of whether it was your idea alone?
Okay, so the idea for having BBC Kernow is something which I think a few people have sort of had knocking around for a while. Personally, the idea sort of came to me from being involved in the past in the Celtic Media Festival, which is a festival which is made up of all the different Celtic nations and regions, and in all of those other Celtic nations and regions there are Celtic language broadcasters. So in Scotland, for example, you have BBC Alba, which is a collaboration between BBC Scotland and MG Alba. They have also have responded to the BBC Royal Charter review, which is happening this year, ready for a new charter to take place from 2017, and are calling for all the Indigenous languages of Britain to be written into that charter, because currently they're not, so there's a separate piece of legislation which supports them. So all the petition is about, really, at a simple level, is asking for there to be a line written into the Royal Charter review that means that the BBC has an obligation, which fits with its own stated public purposes now, to support the Indigenous languages of Britain. And it would be a very simple thing to do. And the petition, we've sort of focused on making it about having BBC Kernow on the iPlayer as a starting point, because that would be a relatively straightforward and simple way to start the process and to pull some of the existing content that maybe doesn't get seen into a more public space, and to start that ball rolling of having a proper commissioning and editorial process for Cornish language content and for Cornish cultural content, to hear more Cornish voices. And that's not just about accent, it's about a cultural perspective. And the reason why now is the time for this to happen, as well as the Royal Charter Review, is in recognition of the piece of legislation that came into force last year, where Cornish minority status has been recognised, and 10 years previous to that, the Cornish language was recognised. So after many hundreds of years of being anglicised, it's important that the Cornish language and culture have a chance to sit alongside the English and Scottish and Welsh and Irish and many multicultural identities that people have in this country.
Okay, that's great. And if you could just sort of go a little bit deeper and just explain what sort of things that might feature on BBC Kernow, because I think there's been a bit of confusion, sort of what to expect from it.
Yeah. So BBC Kernow is the idea of BBC Kernow is it's a platform like any other broadcast channel, and that it has a whole range of different programming within it. So whether that's news, sports, drama, documentary, entertainment, a whole raft of different types of programs, some of which would be in the Cornish language, some of which would be in the English language, some of which would have a combination of Cornish and English, some would be specifically designed to help people who are learning the Cornish language, some of which would simply be a Cornish perspective on local, national and global issues. All you need to do to think about what sort of programmes you would see on BBC Kernow is look at S4C, look at BBC Alba, and see the kinds of programmes that are on there. That's the kind of programmes we'd like to see on BBC Kernow from a Cornish point of view.
That's great. What do you make of the support you've had so far? I think your petition currently stands at 430 odd, is that?
That's correct, yeah. And the way that the petition works on 38 degrees is that every time it sort of reaches a target, it bumps the target up. So we haven't actually set a limit on it at this point. I would like to see more numbers there before we decide to fix a date or fix a target and present it to DCMS. At the moment, we're just sort of seeing how it goes. And I'm very pleased with the support in a couple of weeks with very little publicity really and very little time and energy spent on promoting it. We've reached nearly 500 signatures, and it's steadily rising as we go through, and hopefully people watching this and reading articles about it will dig a little deeper and see what it's about, and if they agree with the principle, sign it then as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Not sure if that answered your question.
That's great. During the week, the BBC said that they weren't currently considering a Cornishman, or BBC Kernow, I should say. What would you say to that?
So the BBC have issued a statement saying that there are no current plans for BBC Kernow. That's a statement of fact. However, it would be much more appropriate for the BBC to engage in a conversation with the interested parties, which include Cornwall Council, who have written BBC Kernow into their official response to the questions around the Royal Charter Review, the Gorseth Kernow, the Cornish Gorseth, which is a body which sort of represents the language and culture and is engaged in those sorts of conversations with many other public bodies. So it would be totally appropriate for the BBC to engage in a dialogue about how they wish to fulfil their public purpose in supporting one of the indigenous languages of Britain, which is Cornish, and also recognising the Cornish minority status and how they wish to better represent Cornish culture across all their programming, beginning immediately and transitioning to a point where BBC Kernow / Cornwall is a living, thriving thing.
That's great. And what next for the petition? Are you going to strengthen it and bring more people in?
So organisations like the Gorseth have got behind the petition. I was talking to some councillors earlier today, both elected members and other people working in the council, and there's a lot of support for it within the council as well. And I think as more and more people become aware of the petition and sign it, and it grows momentum, at some point we'll go, okay, here's a point in time or a number that we'll aim to achieve before we then take it and present it to DCMS. It'd be really nice if the BBC want to engage in a process of dialogue before we talk to DCMS. We'll also talk to the other Celtic broadcasters about coordinating our campaigns, because this is a really crucial time. What happens with the Royal Charter through this year, the decisions that the government makes this year will have an impact for the next 7 years. So it's a very important time to make our voices heard.
Right, okay. That's great. Is there anything else that you'd like to add at all?
If you haven't signed the petition and you think BBC Kernow is a good idea, please go to the 38 Degrees site and sign it. If you don't know whether it's a good idea or not, feel free to contact me. Dig deeper. There's a lot of information out there about the language and culture. You can look on the Gorseth website. You can look at the Cornwall Council website. People who are interested in the Royal Charter aspect of it, the council's response to that is published on the council website, and there's a link to it on the 38 Degrees petition. So I really encourage people to learn more about our Cornish language and culture and support this petition, which will help create some wonderful media which will help with that process.
Okay, there's also a link to BBC Kernow stories on the Cornishman website if you just search at the top. But that's been great. Thank you very much for talking.
No problem. Miraz.
Miraz.